Good morning and welcome to Ucea Elections Interviews 2021. This is Emma Taylor, Graduate Research Assistant and Doctoral Student at Ucea headquarters at Michigan State University. I am here today to interview Dr. John Pijanowski as part of his candidacy for the Ucea Executive Committee. Today, listeners will be hearing from Dr. Pijanowski, professor at University of Arkansas. His research interests include the judgment action gap, well-being, and the pedagogy of leadership. Let's begin with the first question. Please tell us about your background and your work as it relates to UCEA's mission and goals.
Well, good morning, Emma. Thank you. It's great to be with you today. So in my own background, I spent almost my entire academic career working in land-grant institutions, from Cornell University to NC State, now my last 15 years at the University of Arkansas. So when I think about the first mission at Ucea, which is promoting, sponsoring, and disseminating research on the essential problems of schooling and leadership, I hearken back to that time, and beginning with my work as a graduate student at Cornell in the mid-90s, the way we operated was to believe that one of the best ways to integrate our land-grant mission and our work was to seek out strong connections between problems of practice and our scholarship. So for us, that meant engaging practitioners at every stage of the research enterprise and ultimately disseminating what we learn in ways that they can use to better serve students. So I think that's why I've always felt so comfortable at Ucea. Now, this is an organization that does a really wonderful job of balancing those things, of leveraging the talent and the missions of the research institutions that make up the membership towards affecting change at all levels of practice and policy. In my own experience, one example of that, David Monk, who was my chair when I was a grad student, he would always have these conversation tours where we would spend time in Albany, we'd spend time talking to school districts, and he would essentially be asking the question, what's on your mind? What are the problems you're trying to solve? What are you concerned about? Bring that back to our research team. We put together what we thought was a decent research proposal of how we wanted to move forward. And then we had these two retired superintendents who were working on the first floor of our building, directing a rural school center back there. And he'd always send us down to the superintendents. He goes, all right, go downstairs and see if they think this makes any sense. And then when we would finish a project, we always had two goals. One, we would look for a way to publish the work in a peer review journal, but then the other was to ask questions about how can we disseminate this in a way that's more likely to be read by practitioners. And so whether that meant, journals like School Business Affairs and things like that, or how we could present at practitioner conferences, it was always that two-tiered type of dissemination. And so that's, I try to carry that with me and try to find ways to make sure that we're reaching both audiences. Closer to home, when I think about the goal of improving the preparation and professional development of leaders and professors, I've taken a keen interest in developing and delivering professional development opportunities for educational administrators and for professors. Here at the University of Arkansas, I served as director of our Wally Cordes Teaching and Faculty Support Center, and later as the president of our Arkansas Teaching Academy. So both of these institutions are dedicated to mentoring and offering professional development for university professors. And just this year, I received funding to build a consortium on our campus to support K-12 school administrators and how they manage their stress, as well as how they help develop and cultivate systems in schools that reduce stress for teachers and counselors and support the overall well-being of the people who work in those buildings. So I have an interest in that sort of pedagogical development, that sort of professional development. I see that as part of my mission as a faculty member. And I think that background experience, that disposition meshes really well with the kind of work that Ucea has been doing and wants to continue to do in the future.
Thank you. You have served for several years as a plenary session representative. Tell us about your engagement in UCEA's governance.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I've been fortunate to serve for 10 years now as a PSR. And when I went back and did the math, I was a little bit surprised it had been that long. But I'm fortunate that my faculty here keep moving me forward. And I'm always happy to do it. So obviously, we have the more routine aspects of the plenum, like reviewing our financial reports and voting on membership, and and of course serving as a link, between Uce Governance and my own institution. And I've also been really fortunate to participate in several strategic visioning exercises, conversations about how we as an institution might support educational leadership faculty, through the promotion and tenure process, and how we might support program coordinators. And this is some work that the plenum has engaged in over the years that I'm particularly passionate about, because I think that the Ucea is really well positioned to provide guidance that program coordinators and faculty that are of our member institutions can take back and share about what other institutions are doing, how they're helping them manage the workload, how they're engaging in stakeholders. And of course, our stakeholders and ed leadership programs are incredibly valuable to universities up and down the chain. Chancellors care how the superintendents feel about the university and how engaged they are. And admissions officers care about how principal and principal candidates feel about the university and how engaged they are. So there's a lot to leverage there. And there's a lot of power in Ucea's ability to guide those conversations. So I was thrilled that the plenum got involved in developing documents and gathering data and trying to help us all understand a little bit better how faculty and ed leadership programs move through the promotion and tenure process. Going back to my comments earlier about the land grant mission, how these different kinds of scholarship and engagement with the community can be acknowledged in the promotion and tenure process, and how it can be acknowledged in workloads. I've also helped facilitate conversations on how we engage the international community and the role of the university in broader policy debates. And finally, just this year, I've been chosen to serve on a site visit team for a prospective new member. I've done some informal consulting with potential new members in the past, and this will be my chance to serve more formally representing Ucea on a site member visit. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you for sharing that. In what other ways have you been engaged in UCEA?
Yeah, so I've served on the EAQ editorial board since 2017, but and then, in addition to the PSR, I think the best description of my Ucea engagement is that I'm always looking for ways to keep my oar in the water and row. And what I mean by that is that I try to reliably and consistently look for ways to engage in, I guess, what I call maybe the less glamorous work, like volunteering for extra reviewing work, helping to moderate sessions, facilitate group conversations, dive into mentoring opportunities if I can be of service with graduate students, engaging in the everyday life of the institution, and when there are meetings, to poke my nose underneath the tent and try to be as helpful as I can. And so, if I had to describe my engagement with Ucea, it would be I'm a joiner. and I'm always happy to roll up my sleeves, because I know that sometimes that's the work that it's hardest to find people to do, and I'm very happy to do it. And along the way, I've met some amazing colleagues, and then you really get to see how the work gets done on the ground that way. And so that would be my description of how I engage.
Thank you. Discuss your scholarship, research projects, teaching, and/or service that can inform the work of UCEA, particularly the work of the executive committee.
Yeah, so this is an interesting time for me to be doing the work that I do. So my research primarily focuses on what we call the judgment action gap. So what I'm interested in is, once somebody has decided what it is they should do, why is it they sometimes do something else? And that's started for me with an interest in ethics, kind of more broadly defined. But increasingly over the last few years, I've started to become more interested in issues of well-being. We talk about that sometimes in terms of self-care, but also I like to talk about it in terms of other care. So to think about the ways in which school leaders not only are managing their own balance in life and how are they promoting their own well-being, and are they healthy mentally, physically, so on, socially, but also how are they leading systems that are healthy, leading people to live healthier lives that work in those buildings, and how does that kind of emanate, throughout the culture of a building. So I still have an interest in ethics, for sure, and an interest in how sometimes we know ways in which we should be acting in an ethical way, and we somehow get astray of that. But again, become more interested in these sort of more holistic kinds of ways in which we sometimes defeat or are at cross purposes of our own goals. So, for me, that has a lot of value moving forward, because when we look at the executive committee at Ucea and the kinds of work that they're trying to engage in, whether it's disseminating research or whether it's engaging in sort of pro-social advocacy or how we engage with policy work, I think it's really important to address the underlying psychology and social psychology of all these issues. I think it's critically important to understand that the best idea doesn't always win the day. And the reason it often doesn't win the day is because we're being pulled in so many other directions. And that's really at the heart of this judgment action gap idea. So I think that itself are interesting questions to be asking. But I also think this issue of well-being is going to be sitting at the heart of so much of the work that we're trying to do. There's just a siren call going off all across K-12 and higher ed that our teachers are not okay, and our administrators are not okay. And it was a tough job before the pandemic. And I think that one of the hardest things about this year is that a lot of people maybe were under the impression from the outside that the pandemic has waned and the hardest year was last year, and that this year would somehow be a return to normal. I mean, we've already invested so much energy and attention into this idea of how we're going to make up the lost time for these kids, but the pandemic's not over. And the effects of it are not over, and people they're mourning, they're grieving for not just people that they've lost, but grieving for parts of their lives that they've lost, experiences that they've lost, job opportunities they've lost. And I think that they're tired. I think that they've been physically pushed to a large degree to breaking points, and the system itself is stressed. If I had to pick out one issue that comes up every day, it's the lack of substitute teachers. And that puts such a tremendous strain on the system. And so I think this work is going to be important. I think it's going to grow a lot. And I think it's something that we all, even individually, will want to attend to at Ucea for our own membership, our own body. And then the other thing I'll just mention, briefly, is that I'm a Fulbright Scholar alum, and I'm currently on the Fulbright Specialist roster for 4 years. I got to spend a year overseas in Kutaisi, Georgia, and I'm currently continue to be engaged with largely Eastern European countries on consulting on development of their ed leadership programs, working with European accreditation agencies. And so that international consulting and my continued association with the Fulbright program, I think would be an asset to Ucea in helping to perhaps grow our presence with Fulbright to help advise people and set up programs of mentoring programs for people who are interested in being involved more in international work. And so, I believe that my experience and my connections that I've had could join an already, I think, fairly robust and exciting critical mass of scholars who are asking questions about how we engage the international community better. And I definitely would love to be more involved in that.
Thank you. Finally, please share the reasons why you have chosen to run for the executive committee and your vision for the future of UCEA.
Yeah, it's a great question to end on. I'll just share. I'm actually going to share with you what I said when I got the email that I was being nominated. So when I learned of it, I replied, I tried to focus my service on work I find meaningful and with people I enjoy. And I can't imagine an opportunity that does both of those as well as this one does. So count me in. And so on a really personal note, I just really love working with Ucea, and I think the people in the plenum and on the EC are just wonderful people to be around. They're inspiring, wonderful scholars, but also just really great people. And I think I'd really enjoy working with them, elbow to elbow. So that's my personal motivation. Professionally, the way to address that is to get to that question of, well, I said it's meaningful, so why do I think this work is meaningful? And for me, beyond my deep commitment to the broader goal, which is supporting how we prepare and support school leaders around the world, I really believe that the heart of Ucea is driven by a really deep desire to promote conversations about and address in meaningful ways issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And successful school leaders center these conversations, and Ucea has been a leader in centering those conversations. So, while the work itself isn't new, the context we're going to be doing that work in is very new. There's this sense that the work of educators is under fire in ways that they have not experienced before. Communities are hyper polarized, and so are the policy debates about where school leaders should focus their resources and their attention. And so, during this, what I call this slow clawback, from the pandemic and from these conversations that we've been having that have been very sharply focused, particularly over the last couple of years, around issues of equity, diversity, inclusion. And I think this issue of access, it speaks to so many really important issues that Ucea can speak about. Not just how we drive resources, but how we prepare school leaders. What kinds of information and skills are we arming them with, and how do we do that really well? What's the sort of pedagogy that we think makes the most sense to help support them in the field? How do we develop them professionally to address these challenges and this new normal that we're trying to help shape? So all of that, I think is critically important work. But I also think that when you get back to some of the more traditional things that Ucea does, what kinds of research are we guiding and promoting in our journals and in our conferences that helps us think about this new context and what it looks like moving forward. But also, how do we engage with our stakeholders in ways that we can help identify and cultivate allies that will help support us moving forward in really smart and thoughtful ways that are paying attention to the hyperpolarized context, knowing that we can't do any of this work in a bubble. We have to meet people where they are. And so, these are some of the challenges, and one of the ways that we do that is by going back to my thoughts about the international community. It's about expanding our reach. I think it's about growing our community, which means growing our membership, I think, in thoughtful ways, but also, seeing how big we can make our tent so that we can have as many diverse, thoughtful voices as possible in there, putting their oar in the water and helping us row.
Thank you for your time and thoughtful responses, Dr. Pijanowski. This interview will be archived on the UCEA YouTube channel. Listeners can access or share the interview at any time. We also encourage listeners to post comments and questions on this interview in the comments section. Thank you and goodbye.